that nobody had done for 25 years on the American side. I have done what I've done.
He is the first U.S. official to ever set foot on the territory of a new China. In the U.S., he is considered the brains behind White House operations and granted the same stature as the president. In China, he is a highly respected guest of honor.
He's an exciting person to work with because he's always thinking about foreign affairs.
Well, Dr. Kissinger is one of the most charming people I've ever met. He's very funny. He's very clever.
Kissinger is a great strategist. He knows how to shape friendship.
这个人呢，很有学问，他是一个学者。
He had, of course, a pivotal role in opening up China, a role that China has not forgotten, but which America has not either.
During 30 years of Sino-US diplomatic relations, he appeared in both political arenas frequently, making continuous efforts to improve the relationship between the two countries. He is the hero responsible for the defrosting of the relationship between two great nations. His name is Henry Kissinger.
It isn't often in your life that you can do something that's new. That nobody had done for 25 years on the American side.
...60年代这个初期到中期这个时候呢，那么中国就喊出了反帝反修的口号，反帝反修的，那就是美国和苏联一起打了，就是我们把他们都看成是自己的敌人，那么同时呢要同他们展开进行斗争，那么所以就是1966年爆发的文化大革命就对外政策来看，那么当然是强调的就是这套革命的路线了。但是这样做呢，其实是有一个很大的问题，就是作为中国这样一个国家，同时要面对两个对手啊，那么这个压力还是很重的。
新中国成立以后，美国对我们中国一直采取敌对态度，遏制我们，孤立我们，反对我们。这个不承认我们，而且鼓励蒋介石反攻大陆，霸占台湾，所以我们两国之间呢一直没有来往。朝鲜战争以后，我们中国人民志愿军出兵抗美援朝以后，那么两国的关系更加紧张。
It was an odd relationship because basically there had been nothing since 1949. And so there were virtually no contacts. There was no trade, there was no tourism, there was no journalism, no diplomats, virtually no exchange between the People's Republic of China and the United States. And people living outside China knew very little about what was going on inside China.
But one can learn a lot about China by reading history books. And I went to some universities for seminars to educate myself. That was a little difficult because the professors always wanted to talk to me about current problems, and I wanted to talk to them about long-range problems.
And being someone who with a strong sense of history, I think he tried to understand the history of China so that he would understand contemporary China, the China with which he was going to be dealing.
Another nagging issue of the time was the arms race between the US and Soviet Union, which was growing in intensity, as was the Soviets' intent to expand. Late in the evening of August 20th, 1968, the Soviet Union turned out an army of 250,000 soldiers, occupying the whole area of Czechoslovakia overnight.
Fundamentally, it's a U.S. fear of an expansionist Soviet Union that has posed a greatest threat to America. Therefore, America needs to work out an international movement, international alliance to counter the Soviet aggression. So Americans thought that now China has two enemies, U.S. and the Soviet Union. But at the same time, U.S. has had two enemies, Chinese communism and Soviet communism. And the Soviet Union has two enemies, America and China. So it's very interesting. These three major countries in the world has formed a kind of relationship that each would counter other two major actors in the world.
We had an obligation also to improve our relations with Moscow. But our relations to Beijing made it clear to Moscow that we would oppose any what we called hegemony, namely dominating the world.
他们去决定，就是说他们要打独救就打独救。
就是1969年5月份前后吧，那么毛泽东要求这个陈毅啊，他们这几个老帅，就说来一起去研究中国的对外政策。那么，他们最后得出一个结论了，实际上就是苏联同美国相比了，苏联是一个更加重要的威胁。那么，中国呢，应该把主要的这个斗争矛头，这个对准苏联。
On the American side, motivation for approaching Beijing to a large extent was fueled by the benefits the nation would reap. At the end of the 60s, Richard Nixon took office, leaving the U.S. mired in an awkward position amidst the backdrop of the Vietnam War. The U.S. government had begun to realize what a grave mistake it was to get involved in the war. However, to correct this mistake was no easy task.
The Khe Sanh siege turns many Americans against the war. As the battle ends, a Gallup poll shows that 1 in 5 Americans switch from support to opposition.
For the United States, very near the top of their list, perhaps top of their list, was Vietnam. The Americans thought that the Chinese could put pressure on North Vietnam to be more conciliatory, to negotiate in good faith. And there had been negotiations going on between the United States and North Vietnam, and they'd really been going nowhere.
Though there had been no contact between China and the U.S., there still existed channels of communication. Guo Jiading, senior interpreter and diplomat, was in his 30s at the time. He worked as interpreter of the Chinese side during the ambassadorial talks between China and the U.S. in Warsaw, 1962, and witnessed firsthand the hardships and complications of the negotiations.
基辛格那时候多年轻，基辛格向他汇报，向尼克松汇报。中美大世纪会谈最早是在日内瓦举行，1955年8月1号在日内瓦举行。那么到1958年呢，这个台湾海峡局势紧张了，那么中断以后的谈判又恢复了。恢复的时候呢，是在华沙。 一直到华沙1970年2月结束，15年开了135次会议，除了达成一个遣返平民的协议以外，没有任何结果。主要原因就是美国要我们放弃对台湾使用武力。我们说这个是台湾问题是中国的内政， 不可能，中国不可能承担不使用武力。
In 1969, he began the bombing of communist sanctuaries in Cambodia, and when the bombing proved ineffective, he also launched a ground assault over the Cambodian border.
In 1970, China cancelled the Warsaw talks due to the US invasion of Cambodia. The two sides didn't schedule a new meeting after that. However, a tiny ping-pong ball provided Kissinger with some insurance. In the spring of 1971, seemingly out of the blue, the US table tennis team was invited to visit China. What's more, they were received by Zhou Enlai in the People's Hall and accorded high status. Ping-pong diplomacy, as it would later be called, was credited for the small ball's push of the big ball. It changed the course of history.
When China still considered America is an imperialist country, we did not have an official relationship. But we made a friendship. And we reduced American apprehension, Americans' hostility. And we won some American sympathy and support to China.
美国人主动把那个在华沙会谈的时候，通过一个翻译给我们传递信息，就是尼克松总统愿意跟中国谈那个更高层的问题，更高的政治问题，双边的问题，这已经来了一个信号了。然后我们接到这个信号，毛主席、周总理了解到以后，我们就接过来这个信号。
On April 21st, just a week after ping-pong diplomacy made the rounds, China sent word to the US via Pakistan that they were willing to receive envoys of the president. The critical moment was at hand. But who would be chosen to go?
And so there was a very interesting moment where Nixon went through all the people he could send. And Henry Kissinger kept on saying, yes, very good idea, Mr. President, but I don't think he would be able to do the negotiations. And then finally, Nixon mentioned a name of an American diplomat and said, look, he knows China, he's been there, he's dealt with the Chinese before 1949, surely he should go. And Kissinger said, great idea, Mr. President, but unfortunately he is dead. And so Nixon knew all along that he was going to have to send Kissinger, but I think he was reluctant to make the decision.
Nixon wanted somebody who understood his thinking. And I practically lived with Nixon. I saw him 10 times a day. All the business concerned with foreign policy went through my office. So he decided that I was the person in the best position to do that.
Kissinger is a great strategist. He knows how to shape friendship, how to convert a hostile relationship to a cooperative relationship. He may not like an enemy, but he considers that for American security, it's more important to place national security interest above the ideological difference.
I was happy to be chosen. It was an exciting opportunity. It isn't often in your life that you can do something that's new, that nobody had done for 25 years on the American side.
Mr. Kissinger is a very strong man, and he felt that he could do this on his own, and he didn't need the Congress. He informed no one. See, my name is Wolf, but he was a lone wolf.
Before I entered government, as a professor of international relations, I had concluded that an international system without China leaves out a large percentage of humanity and didn't make any sense.
尼克松也好，基辛格也好，就是力图呢，就把一个两极世界转变成一个多极均衡的世界。
Well, ideal world order is one in which all the major countries are satisfied enough so that they will settle their disagreements by peaceful means. And in general, because the world is so complicated and the population is growing so much around the world, one country alone cannot dictate what a world order should be.
If you're going to change a major policy, like turning a relationship from hostility and isolation toward friendship or engagement at least, this is a very delicate thing, and you can't afford to fail.
That depended very much on establishing very good relations with Asia in general and with China in particular.
To this day, the tensions between each camp remain a mystery. It made logical sense then, at the time, to send a secret envoy to China.
He came to China at the order of his boss, President Richard Nixon, to explore China's mood toward America, how China feels about America, how China look at the present, the then international situation, what China would consider in order to improve relations between China and the United States.
That if we advertised the trip before I went, opponents of the relationship would start setting criteria of what had to be achieved and attach conditions and pay attention in a way that would have made it impossible to have those conversations in such an atmosphere.
I worked on the preparation for the trip at the State Department, but was never told what the trip was about, what the papers I was writing were for. Since I had read the record of the Warsaw talks, I knew, because in fact we proposed such a presidential visit to China, or a visit of an envoy at the last Warsaw talk. So having read that record, I knew what was about to happen.
总理决定成立一个班子，是由总理亲自挂帅，然后有叶帅、叶剑英元帅、黄华、张文静、熊向晖组成一个小组，在钓鱼台4号楼、5号楼，就5月份就开始准备了。准备工作就是要资料，各种准备的这个资料，对基辛格的了解，对尼克松的了解，对整个形势的研究。那么将来怎么对付？那么到7月份的时候，信息已经传过来，那是秘密的。我们那几个人到那个秘密的地方去接那个电话，翻译，再传信，其他人都不知道。
In 1971, Kissinger received the long-awaited secret letter from China. He was invited to visit Beijing as a prelude to the US president making his appearance. The letter, which originated from the premier of the new China, Zhou Enlai, was delivered to Kissinger through Pakistani President Yahya Khan.
基辛格那个时候是尼克松派他到南越，到泰国，到巴基斯坦来访问。根本没有说过到中国，不可能的，因为当时不可想象的，中美两个是敌对国家，怎么能够这么高级的特使来访问呢？
On the evening of July 6th, Kissinger suddenly suffered stomach pains at the welcome banquet of the president of Pakistan, Yahya Khan.
这个跟叶海亚汉总统是 经面膜好了，就是说，哟，你肚子疼，大概因为我们伊斯兰堡天气太热，你到我北边的总统官邸去休息去。那么对外就说去养病去了，休息去了，其实他没去，是秘密的做了他们的外事秘书的苏尔坦汗的这个驾驶的专用的军用汽车，戴着墨镜，戴着大檐帽，4个人就到机场。
Just at the last moment, he did get nervous, and he did say to the president, he was leaving from Pakistan to fly to Beijing, and he said to the president of Pakistan, "Will you come with me?" And the president of Pakistan said, "No, I can't leave what I'm doing here." And so Kissinger went off. But it was stepping into an unknown world for Kissinger.
我们决定，那个派一个8航的专机，张文静那个时候是美大师师长，还有王海荣是礼宾司副司长，还有翻译唐文生，还有唐龙斌是礼宾司的，专门到巴基斯坦去接呢，而且是非常保密的。
We had to leave Pakistan very early in the morning to get here by noon because of time difference, and so we left when it was dark, and there was a bed in the back of the plane where I stayed, and Winston Lord went to the front of the plane where the pilots were, and so he has always said, and he's right, that he got to China 10 seconds before I did.
On July 9th, 1971, at 12:15 p.m., the plane landed at the Nanyuan airport on time. General Yue Jianyin, Mr. Huang Hua, and other officials were already waiting there. The first one who got off the plane was Henry Kissinger. There was no formal reception. After exchanging simple pleasantries, they then took the Hongqi car and headed for the Diaoyutai State Guest House.
He 有点紧张，开头很拘束。他第一次我们在5号楼会谈的时候，他们4个人嘛，还有一个保镖就不进来了，他就带了一大架的文件，他们算了一下有7公分，这么厚，所以他开始就是照本宣读。这个总理呢，什么文件没有，就一张纸一支铅笔，什么东西没有。他很紧张，照本宣读，一页一页的念，整整7公分的文件。那么后来总理就跟他开玩笑，他说：“你不要念嘛呀，随便讲嘛。”
And we would meet usually early in the afternoon, and then work for 15 hours, and he was never interrupted. So he did me the courtesy of honor of spending all this time. He was always calm, but very intelligent. I think of him with great respect. When I came here the first time, I had prepared a speech which I delivered to Zhou Enlai, and there was one sentence in it that said, "So here we are in a country of mystery." And Zhou Enlai held up his hand and said, "Do you mind if I interrupt you? But can you tell me what is so mysterious about China?" Well, I didn't have a good answer to that. So he said, "There's 1 billion of us, and it is not mysterious to us. Think about that." Well, what I learned from that is to learn more about China.
这个人呢很有学问，他是一个学者，而且他用的语言呢都是带哲学性的，句子很长，不是一个演说家那种很那个简短扼要的，每一句句子就很长很长，所以记他的东西呢很不容易。
But the first negotiations between high-level officials in China and America proved to be difficult.
And there were very, very difficult issues in that first visit. One of the difficult issues was the Americans were pushing for some sort of statement on Vietnam and the Soviet Union. The Chinese were not going to give it, whereas the Chinese wanted a firm statement on Taiwan that the Americans would undertake to pull out and drop their support for it. And neither side was going to do that.
每天开到半夜2、3点钟，回来我的整记录。有的时候是开到11点，我1个小时的会议，我要花4个小时的整理，因为我是速记，记下来以后要打出来，还要翻成中文，每天工作到早晨5点。
I thought the Chinese leaders would be like Russian leaders I had met. And of course, there is a big cultural difference and historic difference in contact between the two societies. So I was used to the Cold War Russia, which was more confrontational and which made an issue of every little thing became a contest. And the Chinese leaders, when I met them, were concentrating on fundamentals, and smaller things could be settled very quickly.
The most fruitful results of the meeting were the announcement of Kissinger's visit to China and the declaration of President Nixon's future visit to China on invitation.
There can be no stable and enduring peace without the participation of the People's Republic of China and its 750 million people.
The announcement registered like a shot heard around the world.
The announcement I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Peking and in the United States. Knowing of President Nixon's expressed desire to visit the People's Republic of China, Premier Zhou Enlai, on behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, has extended an invitation to President Nixon to visit China. President Nixon has accepted the invitation with pleasure.
Virtually the next morning, Kissinger got a phone call from the Soviet ambassador in Washington saying, when would you like the summit? We can have it any time. And the Americans then played it very cool, and they said, no, we're already going to China, thank you very much, we'll see you after we go to China. And so it was a way of putting pressure on the Soviets.
The State Department, obviously, as a whole, if you can describe it, felt that it had been cut out.
Nixon did not like the State Department in the United States. He didn't trust them. He felt they were liberals. They were people who wouldn't be in sympathy with his goals. I mean, Nixon was a Republican and had certain goals in the world. And so he had a great suspicion of the State Department.
But it was a great shock and surprise to most people on both sides when the news was released.
We hope that our relations with the People's Republic of China will be improved as a result of the trip. We're not sure what the outcome will be, and we certainly don't want any exaggerated hopes to develop.
The first reason, of course, is that we had a formal relationship with Taiwan at that time and recognized them as the government of China. And so therefore, negotiating how we would change our relationship so that we would recognize Beijing as the government of China was difficult.
3 months later, Dr. Kissinger was assigned another trip to Beijing in October 1971. This was in preparation for the following year's presidential visit. One of the major agendas was to discuss the major contents of Shanghai Communique.
Shanghai 公报呢，就是说，这个美方承认，这个承认是 acknowledge。台湾海峡两边所有中国人都认为只有一个中国 ，acknowledge 要严格的翻就是认识到， 他没有一个义务。我认识到你的立场，并不等于我承认你这个立场。Recognize the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government， 它是承认的。这一条最重要，是唯一合法政府。
Again, take the doctor, for example. For me personally, you are all the stuff. Taiwan is part of China, and the American government does not challenge that position. This is terrific. From that time on, I told myself, to be a good diplomat, you have to learn from this great diplomat from across that big lake, the Pacific Ocean, the U.S.
That depended very much on establishing very good relations with Asia in general and with China in particular.
Dr. Kissinger is someone who bravely faces down his opposition and works hard to achieve goals during difficult times. His perseverance and audacity are closely intertwined with his childhood experiences. Nazis killed 13 of his close relatives during his childhood. When he was 15 years old, he moved with his family to the United States. America was a completely new place for him. He no longer had to worry about being beaten by a non-Jewish child while walking on the road. It didn't take long for people to recognize his excellent academic performance and wisdom.
It may also have affected him in his attitude towards the United States. The United States, after all, was the place that he and his family found refuge in. And he did very well in the United States. I mean, he was in the American Army during the Second World War. He then got a scholarship to study at Harvard. And so it may well have helped to shape his views towards the United States.
During his PhD years at Harvard, he started to form his own political philosophy. He tended to seek in history things that would be indicative to the current world. Chinese people have a proverb that explains the same idea. Take history as a guide for today.
He doesn't believe in cynically trying to engage in manipulation or wars in order to stabilize a balance of power. He believes that countries need to maintain relationships so that you don't end up having to deal with a predominant power in the world that is hostile to your interests.
My sense is, from what others have written about him, is that it affected him in the sense of his thinking that stability was very important, that ideology was very dangerous, that trying to keep a balanced world was very important.
From February 21st to the 28th, 1972, President Richard Nixon of the United States of America visited the People's Republic of China. This was a dreamlike trip.
Oh, we were all sort of pinching ourselves, you know. We were sort of in a dream, you know. We thought this was the most exciting thing that we'd done.
In some cases, the reaction of American allies was actually one of shock. The Japanese had not been told of this secret visit, and they learned about it just before Nixon's speech. The Philippines were furious. Indonesia was very angry because none of these countries had been properly briefed or consulted. The British Prime Minister, Edward Heath, was very hurt because he had felt that Nixon was a friend of his, and when Nixon didn't tell him that all this was happening, Heath was very hurt. And I think it contributed to a cooling of relations between the United States and a number of its allies.
I think the public saw that this was a very clever strategic move, and the result over the succeeding months was a real transformation in attitudes, I think, on both sides. The sense in China of rediscovering the United States, and the sense in the United States of discovering a new China that was very, very exciting to explore.
If there was a postscript that I hope might be written with regard to this trip, it would be the words on the plaque which was left on the moon by our first astronauts when they landed there. We came in peace for all mankind. Thank you and goodbye.
Nixon fought the inevitable for 2 torturous years. On Watergate, the House Judiciary Committee passed an article of impeachment charging Nixon with obstruction of justice. But before the House could vote to impeach, Nixon resigned on August 9th.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Just 4 months after Nixon's visit to China, the Watergate scandal broke. On August 9th, 1974, President Nixon became the first president in U.S. history to resign from office. Vice President Ford succeeded him, and the formalization of diplomatic relations between the 2 countries was suspended.
And it was not possible in these circumstances to raise the problem of the formal recognition. Then a new administration came in, and they required 2 or 3 years to prepare congressional opinion, which had always thought of China as an enemy. So this is what delayed the formal diplomatic relations. But our relations were in fact improving.
However, negotiations concerning the formalization of relations were still taking place, albeit slowly and surreptitiously. Mr. Huang Hua, China's first representative at the United Nations, continued to meet with Dr. Kissinger secretly at a small house on 44th Street in New York.
我们那个时候已经买了一栋楼，在林肯中心，那个10层楼的一个旅店，下面有车库，他就派一辆破车，旧车，很次的旧车，开到车库里边，我们就从车库上上车，去黄华和我，还有一个施艳华当翻译，我呢整个管这个整个会谈，包括记录、写报等等。这个车开出去，开到他的44街的门口，停在那儿，我们就上去。他在那儿跟洛德2个人等着，放着点心、咖啡，然后就谈，谈完了就走，就这样维持1年多的时间。
In 1973, both China and America set up liaison offices in each country, which functioned as temporary embassies. Mr. Platt became one of the first American officials sent to China.
We were the first sort of resident diplomats from the U.S. in China for, 23 years or whatever. Anyway, our job was to set up a small office and to start developing contacts with the Chinese and start working on the sort of basic issues, trade, travel, investment, so on and so forth. We started off very, very small.
Deng Xiaoping also met with Dr. Kissinger several times from 1974 to 1975. Their diplomatic efforts contributed a great deal to the normalization of diplomatic relations between the 2 countries. Eventually, during President Carter's term, both sides agreed that the United States would discontinue its formal relations with Taiwan and rescind its military support. However, America didn't make any concessions concerning arms sales to Taiwan.
I was actually in the room when Deng Xiaoping made the decision to go ahead with the establishing diplomatic relations, even though we could not agree on the arms sales issue. So from China's standpoint, that was a very important compromise.
The problem concerning the sale of arms was eventually resolved 3 years after the formalization of diplomatic relations on August 17, 1982. On January 1st, 1979, the People's Republic of China and the United States of America officially established diplomatic relations. Although Dr. Kissinger retired from his post in 1977, he still has no regrets about the diplomatic process during his term.
I'm rather proud of what we did, and I think it is some advantage that several American presidents of both political parties were involved.
I just saw Dr. Kissinger last week at a conference, and I said to him that his efforts in working with the Chinese government to open up China helped so many families, including my own. My father did not see his mother for 23 years. So there are so many Chinese families who were separated unintentionally, who did not want to be separated. And because of the opening up of China and his role in that, he helped to reunify and reunite families.
Dr. Kissinger recognized the importance of the relationship, and in 1989, in the fall, he came to China, met with Deng Xiaoping at that time, and he came again during the period when I was there. We didn't have very many senior American visitors at that time, so I felt that his visits were extremely helpful.
I think conflict between China and the United States is unfortunate for both countries. And I have a certain responsibility as the first American to come here, American official, to maintain that relationship.
In 1982, Dr. Kissinger set up his consulting company, Kissinger Associates. Many company leaders wanted to know the answer to questions such as how to do business in China.
Okay, Roberto.
According to Stapleton Roy, Dr. Kissinger visited China every year during his term as the American ambassador to China, from 1991 to 1995. Each time he visited China, he would spend a great deal of time unearthing new information about China's plight and the development of Sino-US relations.
At this moment in history, China and the United States have a special responsibility. We are the most advanced industrial country, but by a narrower margin than before. China is the most dynamic developing country, and we are on opposite sides of the Pacific. So between us we cover a great part of humanity and the world. So we have a special responsibility to work together closely. And I'm happy that we are making good progress. I like the Chinese people, and I like Chinese culture. And as a student of history, I admire a country, the only country in the world, that has an uninterrupted history of 4,000 years of self-government. That is a tremendous achievement. And I appreciate the human qualities that I have discovered in my Chinese friends of loyalty and reliability and intelligence.
Dr. Kissinger is now considered an old friend of China. After leaving office, he enjoyed an outstanding reception from both the Chinese government and the people during his subsequent visits to China. In the past, what Dr. Kissinger did to enhance Sino-US relations was for the sake of national interests. But he would form an unmistakable bond with the country after getting further acquainted with China and the Chinese people.
Former U.S. Secretary of State, Dr. Alfred Kissinger.
My parents taught me to do whatever I thought was most important and whatever could make the greatest contribution, and always to keep that in mind. I'm now in my 80s. I have done what I've done, and people can read about it and make up their own mind about it. But I'm not going to analyze why I did it.
That depended very much on establishing very good relations with Asia in general and with China in particular.
Thank you, Mama. Hi, my name's Heidi. Today
What do we need to do first?
Okay, so let's go for it then.
Okay.
It's quite good, isn't it? How much flavour it actually adds. Very good. I am a professional cook.